Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to get a little creepy crawly?
Always.
Today we're going deep into the world of rodent control. All about rats and mice.
Hmm.
And you gave me a ton of research on them.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff. I mean, it's amazing how these creatures have adapted to live alongside us, thriving in our homes and cities.
Oh, yeah, for
So we
sure.
call them commensal rodents.
Cool.
Yeah, meaning they benefit from us,
Yeah.
even if we don't really benefit from them.
Right, right. So more than just like the average, city rat.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've got everything from house mice to Norway rats,
Right.
roof rats,
Okay.
even some lesser-known species like the desert wood rat. Imagine these tiny creatures collecting shiny objects for their nests, like little miniature treasure hunters.
Okay. That's both kind of creepy and kind of adorable at the same time.
Yeah.
But let's talk about rats versus mice. What are the key differences?
Well, a lot of people think that rats are just big mice, but
Right.
they actually have different lifestyles, different habits. The Norway rat, for example,
Oh.
is a master burrower, perfectly at home in your basement or the sewer.
Oh, great.
But the roof rat, that's like a tiny acrobat,
Huh?
scaling walls and, making your attic its own little penthouse.
So different habitats for the different lifestyles.
Exactly.
Well, what about physically? Can you tell them apart easily?
Oh, yeah, even just by looking at them. Like even a young rat, you can tell it apart from a house mouse just by the size of their feet and their heads.
Oh, really?
The rats are proportionally much larger, almost like they're wearing oversized shoes and hats.
Okay, I can picture that.
Yeah.
But now on to the less fun stuff.
Yeah.
This research highlighted some pretty serious diseases that are connected to rodents.
Great.
Plague, typhus, even hantavirus.
You're right to be cautious.
Yeah.
It's not just about bites. These diseases can spread through contact with their droppings, their urine, even dust that's contaminated. So if you're cleaning up after these critters, you've got to be really careful.
Definitely. Speaking of caution, the research mentioned deer mice and hantavirus specifically.
Yeah.
And that's a respiratory illness with a pretty high fatality rate.
It is.
So should we be like terrified of every little mouse we see?
Well, hantavirus is definitely a serious concern, but it's important not to panic. I mean, if you think you're dealing with deer mice, just call a professional.
Yeah.
They have the knowledge and the equipment to handle the situation safely.
Okay, good to know. So these little guys are more than just a nuisance.
Right.
But this research also made them sound almost superhuman, like,
They are. They are.
Yeah.
Think of them as miniature ninjas equipped with all these superpowers. They can squeeze through holes the size of a dime.
really?
Yeah. Leap 4 feet horizontally. That's like us jumping across a car.
Wow.
They can even swim for half a mile. That's the equivalent of like 200 Olympic-sized swimming pools.
Okay, I'm both impressed and terrified at this point.
Yeah.
So how do we defend our homes from these, like, tiny, tenacious warriors?
That's where rodent proofing comes in. You got to think like a rodent.
Okay.
Imagine you're a tiny little explorer, seeking shelter, seeking food.
Heck.
Every crack and crevice becomes a potential entry point.
So my house suddenly feels a lot less secure.
Don't worry, don't worry. You just got to be proactive about it.
Okay.
Start by sealing any gaps around your doors and windows.
Yeah.
Think of those gaps as welcome mats for rodents,
Right.
and then cover vents with wire mesh. Make sure there are no entry points around pipes or utility lines.
And of course, keeping food secure.
Oh, absolutely.
No snacks for the rodents.
Yeah, proper food storage is crucial.
Okay.
Airtight containers, clean kitchen. Even the smallest crumb can become a feast for these guys.
So we've secured the perimeter.
Right.
But what if they've already gotten in?
Okay.
The research talked about an integrated approach to rodent control.
Right.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that we're not just relying on one single strategy.
Yep.
We combine things like sanitation and rodent proofing, trapping, and even sometimes rodenticides. It's about customizing your approach to whatever your specific situation is.
Okay, so let's start with trapping. What are we talking here? Like elaborate contraptions or just the classic snap trap?
I mean, both have their place. Snack traps are a tried and true method, but live traps offer a more humane option if you prefer that.
Right.
The key is to bait them effectively.
So what's on the menu for these discerning diners? Is it really just cheese?
Think a little more gourmet. Peanut butter, nuts, even bacon can be very effective.
Oh, okay.
And here's a pro tip. Leave those traps unset with the bait for a few days. This can actually reduce trap shyness and increase your chances of success. It's like a little free buffet before the main event.
Clever. So when trapping isn't enough,
Right.
We move on to the big guns, right? Rodenticides. But aren't those dangerous? Especially with kids and pets around?
You're right to be cautious. Rodenticides are serious business. You always follow those label instructions
Right.
and put safety above all else.
Now, the research mentioned different types of rodenticides.
Yeah.
Single dose, multiple dose, anticoagulants. Can you break those down for us?
Sure. Think of single-dose rodenticides as like a one-and-done solution,
Yeah.
designed to eliminate those rodents quickly,
Okay.
especially if you've got a severe infestation.
Got it.
Multiple dose options require the rodents to feed on them for several days,
Oh, okay.
so a bit more of a slow-acting strategy.
So what about anticoagulants? What are those?
Anticoagulants basically prevent blood clotting, which eventually leads to internal bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
They're generally considered a little safer for non-target animals.
Right.
But again, you've got to use them responsibly.
Yeah, speaking of responsibility, the research mentioned EPA regulations around rodenticides. What's that about?
Well, the EPA is always evaluating the risks and benefits of these products.
Okay.
And they've implemented regulations to minimize harm to children, pets, and wildlife. In fact, they restrict the sale of some of the more highly toxic rodenticides, to licensed professionals only.
Oh, wow.
So it's all about striking a balance, right?
Right.
Effective pest control and also environmental protection.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
We've got to be responsible with this stuff.
Absolutely. And it's not just about regulations.
Sure,
It's
yeah.
also about making smart choices.
Okay.
Using tamper-resistant bait stations, placing them carefully so kids and pets can't get to them, and, of course, disposing of any dead rodents properly.
All right, good advice. We've covered a lot about rodenticides, but there's this other thing I read about resistance,
Yes.
and it sounds kind of like an epic battle between us and the rodents.
It really is a real-life evolutionary arms race. Just like bacteria can become resistant to antibiotics, rodents can actually become resistant to rodenticides if you rely on the same product over and over again.
Wow.
It's a testament to how adaptable these creatures are.
So how do we outsmart these clever little critters?
We got to be strategic about it. Rotating the active ingredients in those rodenticides, or maybe even combining rodenticides with other control methods like trapping, can really help prevent resistance from developing.
This has been a lot of information.
It has.
I feel like my head is spinning a little bit.
It's fascinating, though, isn't it?
Oh, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Can we just take a moment to recap what we've learned so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've really uncovered the secrets of these tiny ninjas.
Yeah.
Their incredible survival skills and, the potential health risks that they can pose.
And all of our weapons, from trapping to rodenticides.
Right.
But always with an emphasis on responsible use.
Exactly. It's all about finding that sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
Protecting our homes and our families while also respecting the environment.
Well said. This has been an insightful journey
It has.
into the complex world of rodent control.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to touch on one more intriguing detail from the research.
Oh.
And that is mimic substances.
Ah, yes.
What are those?
So it turns out that if you incorporate ingredients that mimic the taste and odor of toxic baits during pre-baiting,
Okay.
it can actually increase acceptance of those baits.
So we're tricking them.
We're tricking those crafty critters
Wow.
at their own game.
That is thinking outside the box. It makes me wonder what other innovative approaches are out there just waiting to be discovered.
Yeah, that is a good question. Welcome back to our rodent control deep dive.
Back at it.
We've already uncovered some pretty fascinating stuff about these adaptable creatures.
We have, but something that really stood out to me in this research was this idea of becoming like a rodent detective,
Oh, yeah.
reading the signs.
It's like learning their secret language.
Right.
Instead of waiting for, a rodent to actually scurry across your kitchen floor in the middle of the night,
Right.
you can actually look for those subtle hints that they're sharing your space.
So what kind of signs should we be on the lookout for?
Think droppings, gnaw marks, even like those greasy smudge marks along walls
Yeah.
where their fur has rubbed off. It's almost like finding their tiny little paw prints and realizing you're not alone.
So if I find a tiny pile of evidence, can we tell what kind of rodent we're dealing with?
You can, actually. The size and shape of the droppings can give you a clue.
Okay.
Rat droppings are larger,
Mm-hmm.
and their gnaw marks are more like tiny chisel marks.
Yeah.
Whereas mice droppings and their gnaw marks are smaller and more delicate.
So we're comparing like a power tool to a handsaw.
Exactly.
I like that. So it's not just about knowing how to get rid of them, it's about knowing how to spot them in the first
Right,
place.
you got to crack the case first.
We are investigators.
Yes,
So once we've done that, then we can come up with our plan.
exactly.
And we've talked about, sanitation, trapping, rodenticides, but is there a one-size-fits-all approach?
Not really. The ideal strategy really depends on a lot of factors.
Yeah.
How bad the infestation is, the type of rodent you're dealing with, even the specific environment. It's really like a custom-tailored plan.
Okay, so let's say I've got, a little mouse problem in my pantry.
Okay.
What would be the first line of defense?
I would start with good sanitation
Okay.
and some well-placed traps. Make sure you remove any food sources,
Mhm.
seal up any entry points you can find, and set those traps along their travel routes.
So we're cutting off their supply lines,
You got it.
setting up ambushes.
Exactly.
Now, what if the situation is a little bit more intense?
If you're dealing with a more severe infestation, or if you suspect you might have rats,
Okay.
it's probably best to call in a professional pest control operator.
Okay.
They have the expertise and the tools and, frankly, the access to some stronger rodenticides that aren't available to the public.
Makes sense. Safety first, especially when we're talking about those, chemicals.
Absolutely. And even if you're tackling it yourself, wear gloves when you're handling traps or bait. Keep those rodenticides away from kids and pets.
Right.
Dispose of any dead rodents carefully.
Good advice. Now, going back to rodent proofing for a minute.
Yeah.
We've already talked about how these critters can squeeze through the tiniest spaces.
They really can. I mean, rats can fit through a hole the size of a quarter.
What?
Yeah. And mice can squeeze through a hole as small as a dime.
Oh my goodness, that's tiny.
They're like little escape artists.
I know. So we're talking like gaps under doors, cracks in the foundation, those little openings around pipes and wire.
Yep.
Vents, chimneys, you name it.
It seems never ending.
And once you've found those vulnerabilities,
Okay.
seal them up. Use steel wool, wire mesh, caulk. Basically, build yourself a little fortress to keep those invaders out.
It's like a constant battle.
It can be, but the key is vigilance. Regular inspections and, being proactive about maintenance can go a long way towards preventing them from getting a foothold.
So what about those ultrasonic devices?
Really?
They claim to repel rodents. Do those actually work? The research is a little mixed on those.
Okay.
Some studies show that they might deter rodents initially, but they tend to get used to the sound over time.
So it's kind of like playing the same song over and over again. Eventually, it just fades into the background.
Exactly. So it might be more of a preventative measure
Okay.
than a solution for an existing infestation.
Now, this was an interesting concept in the research, something called rodent competition.
Oh, yeah.
Is it really like survival of the fittest out there?
It's fascinating. Different rodent species actually often occupy different niches within an environment. You might find mice in the lower levels of a building,
Okay.
while the rats kind of dominate the upper areas.
So they've divided up the territory.
Almost like they've got their own little hierarchy,
Right.
and their competition for resources can sometimes actually work to our advantage.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like house mice, for example, are known to outcompete deer mice,
Huh.
which can actually reduce the risk of hantavirus transmission.
Well, that's a plus.
A little bit of natural pest control.
So we've talked about EPA regulations,
Right.
but the research also highlighted the potential risks to wildlife.
Yes, it's an important point.
Right.
Rodenticides are effective for controlling rodent populations,
Right.
but they can also be a threat to other animals, especially predators like owls or hawks or bobcats.
Oh, right, because they might eat a poisoned rodent.
Exactly. Secondary poisoning.
Yeah.
And that can have a devastating impact on those important species.
It's not just about getting rid of the rodents, it's about the whole ecosystem.
Absolutely. We've got to be responsible and consider the impact of our actions on the environment.
This has been eye-opening.
It has been, hasn't it?
I feel like we've gone from being kind of overwhelmed by these creatures
Right.
to feeling empowered with all of this knowledge and how to, manage them.
Exactly. Knowledge is power.
Right.
And the more we understand about their behavior, the risks,
Yeah.
the better equipped we are to make informed decisions.
I feel like I've earned an exterminator badge.
You have. But before we declare ourselves rodent warriors,
Okay.
I want to talk about one more fascinating topic from this research.
Okay, what's that?
Bait shyness.
Oh, yeah. It's like they've got this sixth sense.
It really is. They're amazingly good at detecting and avoiding anything that could be harmful.
So one bad experience.
And they're onto us.
Wow.
They learn to associate a particular bait with, illness or death.
So they're smart.
They really are. It's incredible. Really adaptable.
So how do we outsmart these bait-savvy rodents?
Well, that's where techniques like pre-baiting come into play.
Okay.
Remember those mimic substances we talked about?
Yes.
You introduce them to a safe version of the bait first.
Right.
Reduce their suspicion.
Pricking them.
Exactly. It's like a little culinary deception to get them to accept the toxic version later.
I love it. This deep dive has really taken us on a wild ride.
It has.
We went from feeling totally overwhelmed to feeling empowered.
And that's what it's all about.
Knowledge is power.
Exactly. The more we learn about this fascinating world of rodents, the better prepared we are to coexist with them.
Hopefully at a distance.
Definitely at a distance.
Back for more rodent adventures. We've really been digging deep into this world, learning all about their crazy survival skills and how to, keep them out of our houses.
Yeah, it's amazing how much there is to learn about these little guys.
I know. But before we wrap up, I'm curious about one last thing. The research emphasized, understanding why they choose our spaces in the first place.
It's about seeing the world through their eyes.
Yeah.
Sure, they might be attracted to, food that we accidentally leave out.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. They're looking for shelter, warmth, a safe place for their babies.
So it's not just about locking up the pantry. I got to make my whole house unappealing.
You got it. Think of it as creating like a rodent-resistant environment.
Yeah.
Trim back any overgrown vegetation. No jungle gyms for the rodents. And clear out clutter, get rid of those, piles of debris or wood piles. We're basically telling them this is not a rodent resort.
No vacancy. But what if they've already moved in? The research mentioned tracking powders.
Oh, yeah.
What are those? Some kind of secret weapon.
They're pretty interesting. It's a fine powder that they pick up on their fur as they move around. And then as they groom themselves, they ingest the poison. It's kind of like they set the trap for themselves.
That's sneaky. But is it safe?
They can be effective, especially in those situations where baiting is tricky or if you've got some really cautious rodents. But you got to be careful. They can be dangerous for kids and pets.
Right.
So it's best to consult with a professional.
Okay, so professionals are probably dealing with, some pretty impressive rodent populations. And speaking of populations, the research mentioned something about how quickly they can multiply.
Oh, yeah. Get ready for some crazy numbers. Rats and mice can reproduce like crazy. A single female rat can have multiple litters per year with up to 12 pups each.
It's like an army of rodents.
Exactly. That's why early detection is key.
Catch them early.
Exactly. The sooner you address the problem, the better.
Okay, so it all comes back to those, detective skills we were talking about.
Right.
Being observant.
Yes.
And acting fast.
You got it. It's like a game of rodent chess.
Oh, I like that.
I got to stay one step ahead.
Oh, I feel like I've officially graduated from Rodent Control 101.
You have.
And hopefully our listeners feel the same way.
Yeah, I hope so.
We've covered the basics, their behavior, all those control techniques.
Always emphasizing that responsible use.
Right. So as a final thought for our listeners, don't underestimate the power of prevention.
Oh, yeah.
A little effort up front can go a long way.
It really can. Seal up those cracks, keep things clean, be on the lookout.
Great advice. Well, that's it for our rodent deep dive. It's been quite an adventure.
It has.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating topic.
Sounds good.